Hello, friends. We welcome you to the Legal Breeze. Today, we will be discussing about the importance of G7 and its status under the international law. What is the significance of G7 in the lawmaking process, particularly under the international law domain? We'll be dividing this discussion into the following parts. First, we will discuss about the history or origin of the G7. Next, its jurisdiction, how it has expanded its operations from economy to climate change, education, health, all other things. What is its influence or role, how it shapes and molds international law and international relations? What is the impact of G7 in India's foreign affairs or India's international legal obligation is concerned? So these are the few aspects we will be discussing it. First, let us discuss the history. In the 1970s, there was twin economic challenges the world was facing. First one is the fixed currency convertibility, forex convertibility issue, because till then the US gold reserve was made as a benchmark. Based on that, the forex convertibility has been determined. When the gold reserves of US has been depleted to a greater extent, the world economy has plunged into a crisis. Thereafter, one more crisis in the form of oil supply crunch. The Middle East countries, in order to register their protest against the Western countries, in the aftermath of Israel war, since these Middle East countries have been defeated against Israel with the help of Western countries, the Middle East country wanted to teach a lesson to these Western countries in the form of restraining supply or refusing to supply the oil to the Western countries. Thereby, the Western countries have suffered a lot. It is in this backdrop G7 was started emerging slowly. First, it has been initiated bilaterally by two member countries belonging to G7, namely the France and the United States of America. The French president and US president met together. They have made a plan. Thereafter, they have invited across the continent the developed industrialized countries, but only democratic countries. Please remember, this arrangement has taken place during the peak of the Cold War era. So Russia, China were not part of these initiatives at all. Whether Russia, China developed at that point of time, that is a different question. But since they have their own system of economy, and that's why, since it was the Cold War which is prevailing, the US based alliance naturally will avert to have Russia on its side. Later on, Canada was invited, thereby it has become G6. And slowly, another country has been added. With the inclusion of Canada, it has become G7. G6, I think 6 countries were there, then later on Canada was included. Thereafter, this G7 remained as a G7 for a quite long time. They started deliberating mostly on the economic affairs, financial affairs, all these things. Then, after Soviet Russia has collapsed, Cold War has come to an end. Russia has also adopted market economy. It has also adopted the democratic path. Therefore, the G7 was expanded to G8. Till then it was called as G8 till 2014. Once Russia has blatantly annexed Crimea, a part of Ukraine, violating all the norms, in order to show its protest, the G7 countries have removed or expelled Russia from the G7 grouping. From 2014 onwards, again the group has become G7. Now, there is an evolution taking place. In the 47th meeting of G7, which was recently held in Cornwall, in a place called Carbis Bay, it's a sea resort. There the conference has held. India has also been invited as a guest country. Remember, Indian Prime Minister, namely Mr. Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh has been invited 5 times to the G7 meetings as a guest country. Mr. Modi ji, the current Prime Minister, has been invited twice to the G7 meetings. We will be discussing about its implications on India's affairs little later. But India has been invited as a guest country, not as an observer, guest country. That's it. Now, we should understand there is a proposal to expand this grouping. Please remember, Dr. Manmohan Singh, whenever he has been given an opportunity to speak in the sidelines or in the meetings of G7, he was always pitching or batting for the expansion of the G7 group, particularly to reform the multilateral institutions such as IMF, World Bank, all these things. Because the G7 countries playing a dominant role in these sort of international institutions such as IMF and World Bank, popularly known as Bretton Woods institutions. So he wants to have a greater role for countries such as India. Now, in order to accommodate these demands, there is a proposal put forth by the current presidency, that is the UK, in the G7 meeting to expand this group to include 4 members or 3 members, which includes South Korea, South Africa, India, I think Brazil. Now they wanted to even change the name of this grouping from G7 to D11 or D10. What is this D10, D11 stands for? Democracy. Because all these countries are democratized countries. Please remember, Soviet Russia is not the major threat to G7 today. Who is the major threat? China. So, in the post-Cold War era, they wanted to have an alliance based on democracy and non-democracy. Because they consider Russia as well as China as an autocratic states. So they wanted to strengthen the democratic countries as an alliance against these autocratic countries. Therefore, they wanted to expand this operation of G7, the ambit of G7, to D10 or D11, which is likely to take place in the upcoming future, whatever you may call it. This is one way. That's why it is very significant. Whether India should accept it or not, we will answer it a little later. And we have also told you that primarily it was started as an economic organization. But later on, in order to gain more importance, significance in the international arena, the footprints of G7 has been kept on expanding in the field of education, climate change, environment, and even health. For example, there is a declaration issued, the declaration called Carbis Bay Health Declaration. Please remember, you have a Doha Declaration of TRIPS on public health. Similar lines, there is a declaration issued by the G7 countries known as Carbis Bay Health Declaration. This declaration pledges 1 billion doses of vaccinations to prevent COVID-19. Then also they have pledged a dedicated amount to further the research and to provide necessary assistance, technological assistance to cure this vaccination. Apart from that, they have also agreed in principle to consider the proposal put forth by South Africa and India in the WTO relating to the TRIPS waiver for promoting access to the vaccination of COVID-19. So this is the crux of this Carbis Bay Health Declaration. Above all, they have also come up with an interesting declaration relating to the climate change. They have made a dedicated corpus fund to mitigate the climate change and to support the developing countries and the LDCs so as to achieve the target set in the Paris Accord for the purpose of supporting the developing countries and the LDCs so as to fulfill their climate target or carbon emission target to reduce the carbon emission based on the historical liability or historical emission, whatever people may call it. This is a very welcomeable step. And beyond that, they have went one more step further. They said hereafter, they will not support or start any new plants, power plants based on coal energy. And they will also phase out the existing ones slowly. Thereby, it will promote cleaner energy and reduce the carbon emission. This is very important. So, these are all the few important steps taken by the G7 countries. Now, let us come back whether India should accept it. India has a foreign policy. The non-alignment movement, NAM, is our well-established foreign policy. We have never aligned at any side, whether on the US side or Russian side during the Cold War. But however, we have also signed something called Friendship Treaty in the times of crisis. So you can never say exactly we have never aligned. We have balanced our relationship depending upon our needs. By joining this group 7 or D11, D10, whatever the format it may take place, we are openly declaring that we are against China. Should it be like that or should we tone down? India has to take a call on that. So we have already refused to join RCEP based on our own considerations. Right or wrong, time will answer for that. But India has to take a call now. But this is a good opportunity for India. You will have a better voice in IMF, World Bank, and your voice will be heard in shaping the majority of the economic decision, because more than 40% of the global GDP is concentrated in this particular G7 bloc as of now. This is very important. Then the last part, what is the status of G7 in international law? What is its binding nature? Please remember, it's an intergovernmental organization. It does not even have a secretariat. There is nothing called assembly, executive committee, all these things. There will be annually one meeting will be hosted by the presidency country. The presidency rotates from one country to another country based on its process system, based on its own arrangement. And there is no treaty between all these member countries. Like, say, example, in WTO, there is an agreement called WTO agreement. Apart from the other coverage agreement, such as from Annexure 1 to Annexure 4. You have many agreements for, say, even SAARC. There is an agreement. Okay, ASEAN, there is an agreement. But for this G7, there is no agreement at all. It is not backed by any internationally, legally binding treaty or agreement or convention, whatever you call it. But in the absence of this organization survives purely on an unwritten or conventional basis. Say, you will be studying in the constitutional law, UK and Israel are best known for unwritten constitution. This organization is known for having an unwritten convention or treaty, something like that, under international arena. G7 is the best example for that. It successfully works out. Then what is its status? Why it should be respected? They generally issue a declaration or communique, official communique. What is its validity under international law? Can it be treated as a primary source? The answer is no. But it has its own value in the diplomacy. It can be treated as an evidence of customary law under international law. Okay, Article 38, 1B of the ICJ statute describes this. So that's very, very important. Then its influence, might is right, since they have the economic ability, through their economic sanction, they have brought certain good things also. Say example, FATF, Financial Action Task Force, Financial Action Task Force, FATF. This is largely helpful in preventing the funding of terrorism and terrorist countries. This is very helpful. Pakistan keeps quiet for a few months because of primarily that the G7 may impose sanction. G7 may put it under the currently it has put under the watch list, grey list. But if it may take actions if the deadlines or dictates given by the G7 countries is not met by the Pakistan. That's the crux. So though there is no international treaty, binding treaty, but its influence is quite high, because in today's diplomacy, trade diplomacy and economic diplomacy plays a crucial role in determining not only international law, it also determining international relationship. So there is an opportunity for India to walk into this elite club. It is up to India to think and accept the opportunity based on our national security and our national interest. We hope good things happen sooner rather than later. God bless you all. Jai Hind.